Hello, tabletop wargamers, and welcome to Tried and True, a podcast hosted by the Delaware War Machine community. Join us as we dive deep into topics around our favorite games, exploring methods and techniques proven to enhance anyone's gaming experience. Hello, everybody, and welcome to the 9th episode of Tried and True. I am your host, Paul.
And I'm Erica.
If you've been paying attention or keeping up with us, you probably are wondering, wait a second, should have been Andy and Dan and even Grant on this episode. So we tried to go and get a last-minute schedule set up. It just didn't work, and we're just trying to hit it later on down the line. But we're going to go and finish up the series on how to host your first large event. Grant's really excited to go talk about Liberty Brawl, and Erica has done above and beyond for the Susquehanna Scuffle. It's already done now at this point, right?
Yeah, so we have our venue lined up. All the tickets sold within 24 hours. So I actually talked with Sam. Shout out to the Maryland fam. We were able to get, I think, 2 extra teams, 6 extra players. But yeah, we got some cool prizes lined up. Shout out to Privateer Press. They hooked us up with some really cool swag for the event. Yeah, I'm super excited. Can't wait to run it.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to just seeing it, and it's going to be a lot of our first team events for a bunch of our new players and ones that have never done it before, so we're just excited to do something so local for them. We also want to take an opportunity, though, and just kind of, give a shout-out to More Than Dice, Gonzo, over there. He ended up giving us another platform to go ahead and share the good news and share our podcast with everybody, so just a big shout-out to him to help us out.
Yeah, thank you, Gonzo.
If you're really happy with what you're listening to, please find us on YouTube and give us a like and a subscribe. When you end up doing that, it ends up helping us out. It makes it more easier for other people to find our content. You'll be able to see loads of battle reports, lots of fun stuff out there. It's great.
Yeah, the other thing too is if you're on one of our social media platforms, any kind of feedback, it just helps us improve the quality of the project that we're doing here. And if there's anything additional, let's say like hobby videos on how to make terrain or paint models, or even some lore videos, we're open to that as well. Just let us know. We love making content for this game.
And if you want to go ahead and help us out, we do have a Patreon. Erica has done so much in order to get these battle reports happening, and we're just trying to recover some of the costs with that. And, if you support us on Patreon, you get to go and see some pretty cool artwork. You get to go see the battle reports and the podcast early. It's definitely worth it. I mean, it's $1 a month, gets you so many options. I mean, why wouldn't you, right? But what I wanted to do is, well, we're probably saying why is it that we're not doing the hosting your large event? Well, a really awesome opportunity presented itself back in May. Well, when Gonzo and I were talking, he said, hey, are you interested in maybe seeing if you can go talk to some people at Privateer Press and see what's going on? So since the middle of May, I've been emailing back and forth, and we got this really awesome opportunity to, interview one of the employees. And then I said, hey, we normally end up doing large series. Are we able to open up to maybe 3 or 4 employees? So on this series, we're actually doing a deep dive into what's going on in Privateer Press this summer. And it is a super, super exciting time. And we just couldn't pass up the opportunity with this.
We're also really happy to be able to share, not just having Privateer Press come on the show. So thank you so much for spending your time here with us. But also we fielded questions from not just the podcast group, but our community as well. So it was such an exciting time just to get everybody together and be able to come up with these lists of questions and just what's on people's minds.
Yeah, and just to build interest, build enthusiasm, excitement for everything that's coming down the line. We said that we weren't a current events, but we can't pass up the current events. So we'll go and share everything that's going on that we're able to share. And I want to go talk about these professions in general. What is it like to be a 3D modeler? What is it like to be a organized play manager? What is it like to be an RPG development manager? And speaking of RPG development, we actually have our first guest on from Privateer Press, and that's going to be Matt Goetz. Matt, go ahead and say hello and introduce yourself.
Hey, welcome to Tried and True.
Hello. Thank you for having me. Can I just take a moment to say that you guys have impeccable timing.
Thank you so much.
We try, man. We don't know what we're doing, but we're trying our best.
We claim 100% ignorance and 100% enthusiasm.
Nice.
So, Matt, your role is RPG development manager at Privateer Press, but what exactly is that job? What are you in charge of doing?
Basically, I'm in charge of kind of shepherding all of the role-playing game products that you see from concept to conclusion. That involves doing writing and development myself, coordinating with a team of freelancers, coordinating with our editors, both internal and external, fielding feedback from playtesters, helping to the level of like helping pick which illustrations are going to be matched up with particular paragraphs from our library of art. It it's really a lot of different hats that are in service of making sure an RPG gets made.
That's really like exciting because I think about all the different RPGs out there. I love Dungeons and Dragons, Pathfinder, Numenera, Cyberpunk. There's so many ones that are out there, and it's amazing. Just even you saying about like, well, where does the art go? These are things that I wouldn't even think about. I just look at my book, I'm like, oh, this is so cool, and I'm just excited to play. But I really think it's very easy for us to just kind of forget the amount of work that goes into like projects like this.
Yeah, it's interesting too because before you get into it and start doing it, you like I didn't have an appreciation earlier on about just how many different roles are necessary for any one of these products to even something as small as like one of those DLC PDFs that we release that still requires a number of people to put their hands on it and put their eyes on it before it can be released to the general public.
So, saw scroll on my social media today that you guys had a Kickstarter that seemed to knock it out of the park today.
I mean, it just launched.
I know, and it was like I saw it on Discord, Facebook, like all my War Machine Discords were just on fire about this Kickstarter. So, congratulations.
Thank you. This one's really exciting for us. Crix is one of the initial 4 factions for War Machine. It's this very different place. So being able to go into this, archipelago of pirates and like displaced Mulgar from the mainland and zombies and ghosts and everything, and just like put them all in one big basket's been a lot of fun.
That shark that you guys have, that art's badass. That thing's
Yeah.
really cool.
Yeah.
No, I was going to say, is this like the first time that Crix has really been explored at all? Because I don't remember there ever being what like the lore. It was like, what is the big Ogren guy, Slaughterborn? What?
Gerlach Slaughterborn is one of the Blood Gorgers. He's the general of the Slaughter Fleet and just a big old blighted trollkin.
And he has like the most badass name ever. I love it. but I remember he had like a story, I think, in Excursions, and I guess it would just maybe be the Crix like codex or whatever the battle book that we used to have. Is this the first time that Crix has really been explored in the Iron Kingdoms?
Well, sort of. There was a lot of content on Crix in the old D20 days in the World Guide, but there wasn't a lot of opportunity to play as them, like to play as Shard Islanders or Satixis or Blighted Ogren. You could sort of make it work with the Monsternomicon back in the D20 version. They had like if you want to play as this race or that race, and there were a lot of like level adjustments you had to do. It wasn't as simple as just creating a new Satixis character. You had more math than normal that you had to worry about.
Sorry, I was going to say, you saying about the level adjustment, I forgot about that. That was such a pain in the butt if you wanted to go play like anything. I remember like playing like the bug people. Oh my gosh.
Oh, the Thrycreen?
Thrycreen, yeah.
Yeah. So it also didn't get a lot of love in the second edition of the RPG. We released the Satixis as a race, but that was basically it. So I guess you could say this is the first time we've really had a focused effort on representing Crix and the Shard Islands in the RPG.
Yeah, I'm just really excited by that because it's just, I come from an area of ignorance just because I don't know much about the lore. I don't know much about the fluff. I don't remember the names of some of these, the characters, right? But I'm just excited to see that this world can now be explored and just, what's there to go and take a look at, adventures to go and have your modules or, campaigns that are going to be in there. Because it's stuff that we never knew, or at least I can say I never knew that it was actually there to begin with. So I just think, choosing the Shard Isles is just such a neat setting.
Well, I think it's really cool, just Crix in general, because it's always been kind of this mysterious part of the Iron Kingdoms lore. I think, so I picked up the core rule book for the D6 system that came out, about 10 years ago. And the free, like, short campaign one-off that came with that, I think the end of it was, like, the box that your party stole.
Yeah. That was Fool's Rush In, the first adventure that was released for the 2D6 system.
Yeah, and I think that's how that ended, and it was like a Crix Cortex in the box, and I remember playing that and thinking that was so cool because it's been such a mysterious thing.
Yeah, one of the things that we wanted to do was shed like the right amount of light on the Shard Islands and Crix in this. As an example, what I mean by that, the Isle of Satix, where the Satixes come from, it's always been described in setting as like this mysterious location and nobody knows where it is. And it's like, well, if you're going to be playing Satixes characters, obviously they know where it is. Does that mean we need to find an island on the map and pin it down and say, here be Satix? We chose not to do that, because even if the player character Satixes are aware of their origin, it's still a big secret for them, right? So not something that we wanted to just like baldly and nakedly put on the map for all to know and pin ourselves into a corner for all time.
I think it's actually a smart decision to do that, because you're kind of saying it as in like, hey, the world, we don't have this information right here, but if your DM wants to go ahead and do this, like, they can probably create something of their own out of that. So, and that's something I've always liked about the 5e system, or just campaign writing in general, is that you can typically like take the resources and then, build something a little bit different or unique to you from it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Sorry, I was just gonna say, just to kind of piggyback off of what Paul just said, I think it kind of leaving it open-ended like that's cool too, because you get a lot of theory crafting with communities and online, and that just helps with discussion. Yeah, and just to build up hype.
And that's one of the strengths of the Shard Islands in particular, in my mind. Because when it comes to the mainland, Kador, Lael, Signar, Ord, everybody knows where everything is in those, basically. Like
everything's Kador, they just don't know it yet.
North Kador, Short Kador.
Scary Kador.
But the Shard Islands have for so long been deliberately kind of undefined. We even say that there are thousands and thousands more, an uncounted number of islands that are not represented on the map. It's sort of like a tone poem of where the major islands are. But like that is one of the absolute strengths of the Shard Islands as a setting for an RPG. It leaves so much room for GM invention, and we tried to lean into that. One of the books has stuff for like random island generation tables, so if you need to come up with a weird and quirky Shard Island on the fly, you can just roll some dice.
That is so cool. I like that a lot. And that could just inspire someone to make like a whole campaign or a whole story just based on that.
Yeah, absolutely. Like preserving the unwritten areas of the map in the Shard Islands, like keeping that sacrosanct was something that we knew we wanted to do, right? Like we can talk at length about Cullen Rock and Garlgast and Crix itself, but by no means did we want to say this is what every single island out there is and what's on it and who's in charge, because GMs like to invent, we like to tell stories of our own creations.
Well, I think that's actually an awesome segue into the actual interview, because you're talking about GMs writing stories and creating stories. So, Matt, can you tell us a story about how you actually got to your specific position with Privateer Press right now? Like, how did you get here?
Sure. So, as with everybody who works in RPGs, it started with my love and fascination for them. Back in middle school, I got my hands on some random modules for second edition D&D, and I didn't have the core rules, so I had to kind of invent what I thought the rules were in order to be able to play these adventures with my friends, and it just started a lifelong passion and love for role-playing games. So much so that the way that I got into the industry was by writing a role-playing game. When I was in college, I had my trusty game group, and we'd been playing the same homebrew material for decades at that point, and decided to just put it together as a little indie publication. And I was fortunate enough to be going to a school that had a game design instructor who also worked at Wizards of the Coast.
Oh, wow, that's lucky.
Yeah, stars aligned.
Yeah, incredible fortune there. And I explained to him, like, hey man, this is what you do is what I want to be doing. And to show him degree of commitment that I had for this, I just brought in a physical copy of the RPG that we had made. And I was like, this is me and my friends with no budget, just the investment of our time, and showed it to him. And shortly thereafter, I was given my first freelance writing job on 4th edition D&D.
That's awesome.
I got to do some freelance writing for a monster manual and a setting guide and some stuff for the online versions of Dungeon and Dragon magazine. And once I got my foot in the door there, started going to Gen Con to meet and greet with other people, other freelancers, other companies. That's how I wound up meeting Aaron Rudell, who was also writing for 4th edition at that time. And yeah, it was just kind of the luck of happenstance meetings that allowed me to get my foot in the door in the industry, and then just shoving the door wide open afterward.
So when you're meeting with other, writers and authors and creators, GMs in the community, do you find it's like it's pretty open sharing? Is it pretty inclusive where people are open to sharing ideas, or do people kind of keep them close to the chest?
It kind of depends on the person, I'd say. Most of the people that I know and interact with in the industry are very open to talking about what they're working on and giving critique and feedback. And it's a pretty small
Sure,
world,
sure.
right? And most of us are in this industry because we're passionate about it. So getting to talk shop with other people is just like one of the greatest benefits of working in the industry.
So then, did you have experience with 5e before getting into Iron Kingdom's Requiem?
Yeah, I've worked as a freelancer. I've worked on a number of different systems. I've done work for Pathfinder First Edition, a little tiny bit for Pathfinder Second Edition. I've written adventures for 5e for different companies, some that were released and some that unfortunately were not. Um, Obviously, the 2d6. I've done work with Modifius and the 2d20 system and Fallout Wasteland Warfare. Like, I'm all over the place.
Where do you get inspiration for coming up with adventures? Do you go back to a favorite book? Do you have a favorite fiction story?
I have
Or even a series?
I have a number of them, but when it comes to getting inspiration, it comes from anywhere, right? Like, I love movies. I love history. That history has often been inspirational for scenarios or full adventures. Avid reader. I love horror novels in particular, but I didn't used to read a lot of fantasy until I found authors that really clicked with me. People like Scott Lynch and the Gentleman Bastards series, or Joe Abercrombie's books, the First Law trilogy and the
Oh, that's
follow-up
interesting.
sequel
I would have
trilogies for
guessed that
those.
fantasy would have been your favorite genre, but that's fascinating. That's pretty cool.
Yeah, like there are good fantasy
Hmm.
books, don't get me wrong, but I don't know, like alt history and horror tend to be up near the top
That's your
for
jam.
me.
When it comes to horror, are you talking
Yeah.
about like suspense horror or like the thrasher horror? I'm assuming suspense.
Often suspense and like supernatural kind of cosmic horror stories, like
Like Lovecraftian kind of stuff.
Lovecraft, but like less problematic authors usually. There have been some really interesting modern cosmic horror tales, like the Ballad of Black Tom and Lovecraft Country and the Croning. Like all of those are really fascinating because they use the tools that Lovecraft used, but they don't. They tend not to other marginalized groups, which I appreciate.
Gotcha.
When it comes to creating these adventures, though, is there like a specific template that you go about? And I always kind of go back to like Dan Harmon. He talks about the hero's journey and uses for like all the Rick and Morty episodes, right?
Yeah, the story circle.
Yeah, is there something that you use that's similar to that, or is there one that like RPG adventure writers use that's similar to that?
I mean, there are a number of different templates that people use. There's like what was it, the 3-room adventure that Alexandrian talked about, or the 5x5 adventure. Typically, I just kind of don't do that. um, I'll have a loose structure in mind of what the shape of the adventure is, and a lot of what comes out in the wash is a process of discovery. Like, I'm not a seat of the pants writer, but I'm not like a heavy outliner either. I like the ability to be surprised while I'm writing adventures. For instance, in Shadow of the Seeker, the adventure from the previous Kickstarter, there was a cameo near the end of the story of the Hermit of Henjold. I had no intention of putting him in there prior to arriving at that moment in the adventure and realizing, like, it would be good for them to interact with a non-combative Iosan character this time, who's somebody that would be fascinating to include. And that's when I decided it would be the Hermit, and then worked the story kind of around that decision as I went through the revision process.
Gotcha. And then when it comes to like making these content, the Shadow of the Seeker or any content for the Iron Kingdoms RPG, do you have free range to create anything, or do the powers that be kind of set up boundaries to say like, hey, look, do what you want, but stay within this little confined space? Or they're like, there's no walls, go wherever you want to go and see.
It's a mix of those two, honestly. There are some certain like practical considerations that have to go into everything. Like the more we talk about some grand new region or expanse, or dozens and dozens of new monsters in an adventure or a book, like that dramatically increases the art budget, for instance. So there's certainly a balancing act of how free and wild you want to go versus like how much time is it going to take to get this produced, and what do we have to worry about from our existing archive, our existing assets, versus what is going to have to be invented whole cloth. But I don't feel hemmed in at all by the powers that be when it comes to creation, because I've worked with them for many years. They know the kinds of things I want to do. We're open channel of communication between us when it comes to planning what the next steps are and where we're going to be going next.
But with the powers that be, and I'm only asking this because we primarily focus a lot on War Machine and Horde. When it comes to these like releases, these areas, it does it have to kind of fall in line with what direction they want that main product to go? And the reason why I say that is like I think back to Shadows and Seekers, and with what happened to the Iosan, I played Retribution, so I don't know anything, but I just wonder what is going to happen to my faction. Is this going to go and influence like what might I see for my faction later on the line? Does that kind of make its way into like, hey, can you kind of present this ideas to line up for something we're going to release 2-3 years down the line?
Yeah, there's definitely some of that, but that also kind of goes both ways, right? For instance, I recently was drafting sort of the story beats of where a particular faction would be, the direction I wanted to take them in the role-playing game, and ran that by everyone else that are working on the more War Machine and Horde side of things, to make sure that there were no conflicts between what I want to do and what they want to do, and see if there's a happy medium where we can both kind of get what we want.
You just want to, I guess you're looking at having continuity between both systems.
Yeah, absolutely.
And that's where my question was going back to. It's just because I feel like now that you have all these different products, it's just because it's weird because like between that and Warcaster and Mechanica and War Machine, like all these systems kind of play with each other. So it's just I just find that does that make it easier or harder to like make this decision? But I think you're just answering that. It's just hey, we have a conversation around the table. This is what I want to do. Does this work for everybody? And then you drive on with that. But then what about with working with 5e? Have you found like there's been any like benefits or challenges or like designing content within 5e? Because I found that I played a lot of 5e D&D by Wizards of the Coast, and I found that I like the simplicity of it, but at times I found that simplicity, like if I can't think of something on the fly, I might not know a direction to go and run this. Or do you find that 5e is great and you're just like, I love it because it's I'm able to do whatever I want with it?
So when it comes to 5e, there are certain things that don't 100% reflect the world of the Iron Kingdoms. I'm thinking about like a lot of how spells work, for instance, and the spell slots and wizard spell books and stuff like that. However, 5th edition is an incredibly modular system. You can plug in or remove aspects of it without completely breaking the game, which I find fascinating. It's like a Lego kit, right? Where you can add on things like the Pain of Healing rules that we created, or giant stompy robots are still completely viable within it. I really do admire the simplicity of 5th edition compared to previous editions of the game. I do think that they took it in a direction that was easier for players, but also for developers to come up with. There are just the occasional areas, little friction points between the setting as we know it and how it's existed in previous editions versus what are like common truths about 5th edition.
Yeah, and then do you like find? I just wanted to even like commend like the way that you end up bringing War Machine and Hordes into this 5e format, and I always go back to Arcantric Bolt because I look at that as a spell on Ocean. I'm like, how do you make it work in IK RPG? And sure enough, like, what was it? It's that if it hits a construct, it's then, what was the wording of it? It's,
Not having the book in front of me, I cannot remember.
was done. It's incapacitated. Yeah, you make the machine become incapacitated, and I'm like, wow, that literally. I look at the rule in the game, and that literally sounds exactly how that would work in an actual system. And I just think that that's really cool to be able to see that. And how can we make this fit into the 5e system?
Oh yeah, there's a lot of that going on. Like, it's in the new Kickstarter for Nightmare Empire, but I really enjoy how we landed on the Blood Witch class because, like, you've got your Tharn Blood Weavers and your Styxis Blood Witches and everything, and they work in a very particular fashion, right? And looking at the action economy from 5th edition, how spell slots work versus how attacks work, I'm actually really happy with where we got to represent somebody who is able to cast spells because of bloodshed. It's interesting. It like utilizes the reaction system and the spell slot based on the amount of blood sacrifice. It's just figuring out how to solve those puzzles is a pretty rewarding part of the job.
That's really cool. And then it's just like, again, when you're saying design the content, it's like you have the tools in front of you, just how do you make them work? And, it's just, it's amazing to see the ingenuity that you come up with it. I love it.
And I don't even know if I can take credit for that particular ingenuity because I've got a number of very talented writers that I work with.
Well, shout out to all of them, seriously. Like the people that we don't hear or the people that we don't see that work at Private Press.
I just had a question, kind of just an offshoot. So with using the 5e system, is there like a patent on game systems? Like, do you need to ask, Wizards of the Coast, hey, can I use your tool set, for my game? Like how does that work?
Well, we're working within the open game license.
Okay.
Which is something that Wizards did to empower third-party creators like ourselves.
Oh, nice. Okay.
There are certain things that are off the table, though. There are certain, like, Mordenkainen's whatever. You can't make a reference to that specifically. Mordenkainen is their intellectual property. You are not permitted to make use of it, even with the open game license.
It's the same thing with like the monsters as well. Like, what is it? The Beholder, I think, as well. Like, you can't use it.
Beholder is one of them. I think Mind Flayer is a term that you can't use, and a number of others. But everything that we're working with is within that open game license content, and then what we create adds on to what they've said people can make use of. And honestly, it's really smart because it expands the amount of content available to players of their game. Even if you're not interested in playing an Iron Kingdoms game, for instance, you might pick up the book because you want to play as a pistol-toting ghost.
Right.
And we give you rules for that.
Nice. So, Matt, when you are not GMing or running a sesh, what is your favorite general class to play in an RPG?
Man, when I'm not GMing?
Yes.
So, general class to play in an RPG, I don't know that it was a conscious choice on my part, but I tend to play a lot of odd clerics.
Okay.
Please tell me Battle Cleric.
Oh, no. In a game my wife and I were playing in, I was playing a trickster cleric that was based loosely on Loch Lamora from The Lies of Loch Lamora. I played a cleric named Akram, who was sort of inspired by the origins of Islam, and that was in a Pathfinder game, I think. But I do like utility classes, like your alchemists, your clerics, but people who have a toolbox of abilities that let them, benefit the entire party, not just themselves.
Mm-hmm.
But I also like playing weird characters.
Oh man, you would have loved our Strahd game that Paul was running a couple months back.
Oh my gosh, he's so dumb.
Like the most basic character you can think of, a human fighter. I played in one 5e game. He was a Battle Master fighter, but I decided he would be like 70-something years old and recently came out of retirement because he had like a tax lien on his farm. So picked up the old hoplite spear and shield and went off adventuring again because he had like massive debt that he needed to pay
Nice,
off.
nice.
That's
Yep.
something I've always liked about like when playing RPGs and people come up with their ideas. Erica also ran like a 2d6 Iron Kingdoms RPG a while back, and a similar story. I played a Iron Fang pikeman. He was a retired Iron Fang, and he's like, "Well, gotta go off and make sure I'm able to stay alive, and do what I gotta do."
Yeah, I the last just a quick sidebar. So Paul GM'd our last D&D campaign. I played like this urban druid of the moon. So I was a druid that didn't like the woods. So I lived in the city. So I could only turn into like cockroaches, rats, and like cats and dogs, pigeons, that kind of stuff.
Nice.
So one of our first encounters, we go into this like mansion that has this hunter's den. And in the hunter's den, there is a trophy head of an elk. So we finished the combat. I look at Paul across the table. I was like, all right, brother, I have two very important questions for you. He's like, go ahead, send it. I was like, one, do I know what an elk looks like based off of like, I've seen it. Can I turn into it? He's like, yes. I was like, okay, question two, do I know what the rest of the elk looks like? So I had a table of like 100 animals. Half of them were like utter trash that whenever I turned into this elk, I would have to roll to see what my animal body was from the neck down.
That's awesome.
It was a lot of fun, actually. So on the subject of classes, which one is your favorite in Iron Kingdoms to play?
Alchemist, hands down.
Okay, and that's the utility class you're talking about?
Yeah. And some of it's just the very first time I played in the Iron Kingdom setting. It was that adventure Fools Rush In that you referenced earlier. And I played Milo Boggs, the alchemist there. I'm like, man, acid grenades and throwing knives? Sign me up. So I've always had a bit of a weakness for alchemists and alchemist type classes.
It's just like it's. I mean, I know that there's like magic associated with them, but I like the idea of an alchemist as well because it's like it's more of a science. I'm a science teacher, so I really appreciate that and being able to kind of like say like, I wonder what chemicals you are mixing in order to go and make this gigantic, sticky explosion. So
Yeah,
I love it.
Yeah, I've always thought aesthetically the Iron Kingdoms alchemists always look really cool. Like their art in War Machine looks great. The Leylis look awesome. I've always really enjoyed the way that aesthetically they look in this setting.
Yeah, and that sort of late 19th century look to everything is one of the big draws of the setting in my mind. Like the leather and brass, goggles and cigars, like it helps to pull it out of your standard fantasy tropes of, I don't know, Greyhawk, for instance.
Are there going to be more player option modules like the Man of War, Black Clad Druid? Releases will be large character option packages or a 1 to 2 archetype drop?
So I think that for the time being, we're going to continue with the 1 to 2 archetype drops as sort of the monthly DLC. Whether or not we compile those or after getting some feedback, we incorporate them into a larger physical product with some tweaks kind of remains to be seen. We're still just getting started. I think we're about to release the 4th of those here at the end of this month.
And with those releases, how do you decide which classes to make? Do you guys poll to see what's most popular, or do you just try and share the love across all the different factions out there?
It's a little bit of sharing the love across the factions, but it's definitely looking for things that are iconic to the Iron Kingdoms that you can't just play with a standard 5e class, right? Like I love the exemplars, for instance, but you can pretty much already play an exemplar. It's just you've got your exemplar sword and you've got your armor. Whereas something like a stormsmith is unique to the Iron Kingdoms and not something that you can easily replicate elsewise.
No, that's actually really, really cool. And then what about playtesting for these? Like, because you think you said earlier that when you do these, you have playtesters to make sure that it reads well, it plays well, and everything. Like, what is the playtesting involved with that?
When it comes to the smaller content releases, because we have larger projects that our playtesters are, we want them to focus on, like Nightmare Empire. Typically, it's handled internally for the smaller DLCs with myself, Lauren, Eric, Jason, sometimes when he has time to look at it, and also with the writers' room, which are those unsung heroes that you see in the credits. That I have a Discord, and we even when we're not actively producing something, we're just in there chatting.
Gotcha. And then Dan asked this, so shout out to him. He brought up the 3 pillars of RPG, and when you do these design processes, and I believe the 3 pillars are combat, role play, and adventuring, I believe. Do you try to hit all 3 of those pillars whenever you come up with one of these character options?
Yeah, absolutely. There's something really fascinating that is sort of it's not talked about in anywhere really, but when you look at like a subclass, there's typically a structure to the kinds of features the subclass gets at different levels. For instance, with the rogue, its subclasses typically have 2 options at the time you take it at 3rd level that are combat oriented. And then there will be something that's utility oriented. And utility typically hits the uh, the exploration pillar of role playing. And there are some classes that are a little bit more skewed toward like combat and exploration or combat and role play. So you'll look kind of at the base class, see what role it's filling in a party, and that'll kind of help you to determine whether or not you're going to be giving them exploration utility abilities or role playing utility features. Like with your rogues, it's going to be a lot of exploration, picking locks, and et cetera, et cetera. Whereas when you have something like a paladin or the black lad class, they're oftentimes going to be the face of a group. So you want to look at more role playing oriented features to help reinforce that role.
Gotcha. And then the last couple of questions that we had here, these were actually from like our community members, so we were happy that they had it. One of our players was asking about the 3.0 Mechanica guide. Is there any plans to do an updated version of that so that people can make their own cool Mechanica armor and weapons?
So the Libra Mechanica, it's not something that we have immediately on the horizon, but we are rolling out more Mechanica options with everything that we dropped. Like we had the Mechanica and Arcanica in Borderlands and Beyond. We've got Necrotech in Nightmare Empire, and there have been thoughts I've had about doing like a Crucibilis Synthetatus, which is like the in-setting book of alchemy.
That's cool.
It was a dissertation on alchemy, or doing something like the Liber Mechanica, or even the Librum Mechanicus, the evil version of a Libra Mechanica that is responsible for what, like the Seether and Deathjack and everything. So it's something that we're considering, but not on any kind of timeline.
That's cool.
All right. So, Matt, I have to preface this. So, my husband, Andy, he's pretty stoic. Not too many things in media make him get the feels. I think like Leaves on the Vine, right? That gets everybody.
Of course.
So, the novel Godless by Oren Gray is classified as Fire and Faith. Andy loves this book. And this question also comes from 2 of our community members, Chris and Jason. So, since we have a part 1, does that mean we're going to get a part 2 at some point?
So one of the things that we've been doing with the role-playing game, which is like, not as I'm not the publications director, I'm the RPG development manager. I can speak to the role-playing game side of things. We've been using the RPGs, particularly the adventures, as a tool to tell some of the stories that people have been asking us about, and doing so in a way where instead of being a passive participant in the story, you're an active participant. So like with the big changes in iOS, that is something that we at one point might have done as a novella or a novel, but we have Shadow of the Seeker where you're boots on the ground and experiencing all of those events and changes first person, right? Whether or not we have the opportunity to go back to doing print fiction like that, I can't really say. Kind of outside my wheelhouse, but I do know that if we were to do anything involving Zoo, I would want the opportunity to get players in interacting with the new Ichthyr colony and interacting with Tristan's trials and what it's like.
Well, if you tell your friends back at Privateer Press, I think like one of the last books I read was a Kador Butcher book. That was a fun read. I killed it in like a day and a half. So it's definitely a market for it.
I will say Oren Gray wrote Godless, and he has been a participant in every single one of the 5th edition books that we put out.
Oh,
Every single one. He actually just posted a big old blog post about Nightmare Empire today.
Huh, huh.
If you go find him.
Gotta
perfect.
go look that up.
Fabulous. Yeah, I gotta check that out after this.
And then Matt, here's the last one: is that the D23.0 system? I go back to that because I remember there were so many other books out there because you were talking about the open game license, and I mean, there's this one called Dragon Mech. You were literally able to like have Gundams in D&D. I don't know why it was a thing. It was a thing.
Because the game said you could have them, Paul.
But I guess the question here is, how have you found that IK RPG has been able to stand out from all the other systems that are out there, the other 5e systems that people have already created?
So one of the things about it is definitely aesthetic, right? Like there are steampunk editions, both first and third party, but IK isn't really steampunk. Like, yes, it has steam power and has big metal robots that we talked about before, but it's got its own kind of unique aesthetic, the Full Metal Fantasy aesthetic. So that's definitely a part of it, and also like the mechanical side of things. We have 20 plus years of thought and innovation and like world concepts that we can go back to when we're developing things that have already been so well defined by previous writers, by previous developers, that we have a wealth to build on top of. And I think a lot of that does show through when it comes to comparing the Iron Kingdoms to a different similar setting. And I was over on the fan Discord a few days ago when somebody had basically a, how do I sell this to my players? How do I sell this world to my players? And it was fascinating to see the number of people that jumped in and were talking about how, while on a superficial level, it may remind you of these other things that exist out there, it has its own identity. It's got its own feeling with things like the mechanica and the unique ancestries and cultures. And it was like a warm, fuzzy feel that I got seeing people talking about what made them like the setting in the system.
And that's something I've like here as well, because we found like our War Machine community has been growing because people come up and say, hey, what things are you excited about with playing this game? And we only have nothing but excitement and happiness and just a good vibe whenever we go ahead and talk about this game. And it's nice to see that all the other products that PP has been coming up with, it's similar. It's great. Those are great people to have.
Yeah, and I think it's important too, and we kind of hit on this in earlier podcast episodes, is promoting that positivity, because it's so easy to kind of, rip on something or be negative just to, for whatever reason. But no, it's cool. I definitely feel there's a more positive aura about this game as a whole within the past, couple years. So it's been good. It's been a good time.
Yeah. And like I'm honestly really impressed by some of the fan creations and stuff on the Discord. People who are seeing areas that they want explored right away aren't waiting. They're getting in and they're doing it. And that's one of the real beauties of role playing games as a game, is the tools that the developers create are basically teaching every game master out there how to be a developer of a role playing
And
game.
that's got to be
Right.
the biggest compliment for you and your team, right? I mean, it's huge.
Oh yeah, seeing people take these things and spend their own time and their own creative effort and energy to make something in the world, in the setting, even if it's something of their entire own invention. I love to see it.
That's great. Well, Matt, this is getting us to the end of the episode. We want to just take a moment to thank you to coming up on the podcast, being able to share the awesome stuff. Again, congratulations on your Nightmare Empire Kickstarter. Just, again, 40 minutes and it got funded. It was beyond me.
Yeah, it's crazy.
Yeah. Did you have any remarks that you want to say before we go ahead and end this?
Support your local creators. No, it's always a joy to be able to talk about the games and things that I love, So you don't need to thank me for coming on. Thank you for having me and giving me another chance to nerd out about role-playing games. And if you ever catch me at a convention, you or any of the listeners to the podcast, and you want to tell me about your character, please feel free to do so.
You plan on going to Nova or PAX Unplugged?
Oh, Matt, come on out.
I have no idea.
It's a good
Come
time.
on, gotta come
Come hang out in Philly, DC, East Coast.
Oh, Philly. I've heard things about your sandwiches.
Oh yeah, it's a good time. It's we did PAX last year, and yeah, it was a really great time. The that warehouse venue thing is so huge, and it's a great time.
It would definitely be a difference from most of the convention spaces I go to, which are in like Missouri and Indiana. So
Oh yeah.
not that there's anything wrong with Missouri or Indiana.
But we have some in here on the East Coast that you'll like. It's fine.
Yeah. Like, I'm from the Northwest, so I don't do well with, like, muggy heat.
Oh, you and me both.
And that's something Indiana has in spades.
Yeah, I just want to say, Matt, on behalf of Tried and True and Delaware War Machine community, thank you so much for sharing your time with us and answering our questions and giving us a lot of great information. I actually have the new Iron Kingdoms book on order, along with the Witchfire. I have my originals. I'm looking at my 3 books right now. So
Nice.
yeah, I'm really looking forward to looking at those books and running my own game in the next couple months. So
Well,
yeah.
thank you so much. It's a pleasure to hear.
Yeah, Matt, thank you again for coming on here. It's been great. And with that is going to go and conclude this episode. Hey, on the next episode, we're going to go ahead and continue to hang out with people from Privateer Press. We're looking forward to going ahead and talk, ask some questions, and seeing what's coming down in the future. So from all of us from Try and True, thank you so much for joining us. Catch you later.
Bye.
Take it easy.